Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting today with a really, really striking contrast, almost paradoxical, actually. You've got this idea so deeply ingrained, in Western thought going way back. Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. It's huge.
It's a real cornerstone, yeah.
But then you flip it completely, and there's this Soviet-era Russian rhyme, apparently promoted back then. Without knowing how to hate, it is impossible to love sincerely.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely makes you stop and think.
Right. How do those two things even, coexist? It feels like they should be polar opposites.
Absolutely. It throws a real curveball at our usual assumption. That love and hate are just opposite ends of the same stick.
Exactly. And that gut feeling is what we're kind of questioning today.
Yeah, this challenges us to really look at what is love, what is hate, instead of just assuming how they relate.
Precisely. So that's our deep dive for today. How do love and hatred actually function together? Not just as concepts, but, in our lives. Personal stuff, social groups, even politics where things get really heated.
Right. Because our first instinct is probably just opposites. Black and white.
Bright, dark. Yeah. Simple.
But maybe not so simple.
Yeah.
And that's what our sources are suggesting. We've got this essay, Love versus Hatred, by Lev Neymotin. He really wrestles with this. And it's personal for him, too, coming from the USSR, where that rhyme was actually a thing.
Ah, okay. So he has direct experience with that mindset.
Exactly. And then alongside that, we have something quite different. A poem, Cy Dorfman's What Is This Thing Called Love? It's much more personal, intimate, a different angle on what love feels like.
Interesting pairing, analytical essay and a heartfelt poem.
Mm-hmm.
So for you listening, our mission really is to get under the hood of these ideas, use Neymotin's analysis, use Dorfman's expression, and try to get a clearer picture. What are these things, love and hatred, and how do they relate, if not just opposites?
Okay, so where do we start? Maybe with love.
Yeah, let's do that. Neymotin makes this point that love feels, primarily intuitive.
Right. Like, think about someone you really care about. If someone asks why do you love them?
Yeah.
What do you say?
It's hard, isn't it? You might list things, their kindness, their laugh, how they make you feel.
Exactly. A whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
But it's surprisingly tough to nail down one single logical reason. It's more of a feeling. A whole collection of good stuff.
That is so true. You end up pointing at this whole tapestry, not a single thread. There's no neat argument for it. It just feels right, like Neymotin suggests, almost fundamental, part of us.
And then you look at Cy Dorfman's poem, and you see that intuitive feeling expressed in, actions, what love does.
Okay, like what?
Well, lines like, if you could make someone happy and brighten up their day, that's pretty concrete. Or, your wish is my command means you're ready to serve.
Ah, okay. So it's not just a passive feeling, it's active. It's about doing, caring for them, supporting them, maybe putting yourself out a bit.
Yeah, showing them they matter, valuing them being there.
And didn't the poem also mention acceptance? There was a line.
Yes, exactly. Then you will know that you are accepting them for the way they are. That feels absolutely central, doesn't it?
It really does. Core to love is this deep acceptance. Seeing someone, flaws and all, and accepting them. Maybe even loving them because of the whole package, not despite it.
Okay, so love is intuitive, action-oriented, accepting.
Mm-hmm.
What about hatred? Neymotin says it works very differently.
How so?
Well, unlike love's kind of fuzzy, intuitive nature, he argues that hatred usually has a single, identifiable driver, a core reason, even if people build up all sorts of complicated justifications around it later.
Right, like layers of excuses hiding the real thing.
Exactly, and he points his finger very clearly at one main driver.
Which is?
Jealousy.
Jealousy. Okay. That feeling of envy. Someone else has something, achieves something, whether it's looks, brains, creativity, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Any area where we feel someone else is, better off, and we resent it. And Neymotin suggests this jealousy often comes from a hidden feeling of inferiority in the person doing the hating.
So it's really about how we feel about ourselves, projected outwards as hate.
That seems to be his argument, yeah. And what's really insightful, I think, is how he says this personal jealousy doesn't just stay personal.
It spreads.
It can metastasize, yeah. Grow outwards, from person to person up to whole nations, social groups, religious groups.
Wow. So group hatred can stem from this collective feeling of jealousy or inferiority compared to another group.
That's the idea. He calls it primordial jealousy.
Oh.
Primordial suggesting it's deep-seated, almost instinctual, this envy. Mm-hmm. And at that larger scale, it gets twisted into ideologies, justifications for conflict. Awful stuff, really.
So love is intuitive, doesn't need much justifying. Hatred often has this core of jealousy, feeling less than, and needs a whole story built around it to make sense.
That's the core distinction he's making, which leads him to call it a huge difference, a primordial asymmetry. They aren't just mirror images.
Right. Their origins seem totally different, which kind of brings us back to that Soviet rhyme, doesn't it?
It really does. That idea, without knowing how to hate, it is impossible to love sincerely. If love and hate start from such different places, how could one be necessary for the other?
Especially when you think about Neymotin's background. Living in the USSR, that must give his perspective some serious weight.
For sure.
Yeah.
He saw firsthand a system that, well, often seemed to define the us by pointing very clearly at them, identifying enemies to build unity.
Right, so you needed something to push against, to hate, in order to solidify what you were for, what you loved. It's a chilling logic.
It really is,
yeah.
Especially next to the simplicity of love your neighbor.
So it really makes you question that rhyme, does real love need hate? Based on this analysis, it seems unlikely. They seem to spring from totally different wells.
Exactly. The analysis points towards fundamentally different psychological roots.
Okay, so let's talk about those roots a bit more. Self-perception comes into it, right? Neymotin had that interesting idea about a higher power.
Yeah, it's a thought experiment, kind of. Imagine this infinite scale of being, provided by some higher power. Now, where do we fit on that infinite scale?
Compared to infinity, we're all pretty small, like basically zero.
Right, and one zero isn't really much different from another zero, is it?
Huh. No, I guess not.
So the idea is, if we could really internalize that, that on the grandest scale, we're all fundamentally equal in our smallness, perhaps. Yeah. Maybe that could diminish the jealousy, the inferiority.
Because the differences we obsess over seem less important, it sort of levels the playing field of self-worth.
That's the potential implication, yeah. If my success and your success both round down to zero next to infinity, maybe my reason for feeling jealous of you kind of evaporates.
It's a philosophical angle, but interesting. And, it almost connects back to the poem, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, those lines in Dorfman's poem, I like who I am and I'm happy you see. And accepting each other, whatever we do. There's a sense of self-acceptance there.
Ah, I see what you mean. If you have that solid foundation of liking yourself, maybe you're less vulnerable to feeling inferior.
Exactly. If you accept yourself and you recognize the inherent worth in others, like the poem suggests, maybe that's the antidote. Maybe that counteracts the feelings that fuel hatred.
That's a really powerful connection. Feeling secure in your own value.
Yeah.
Maybe that makes other people's strengths less threatening, less likely to trigger that corrosive jealousy.
So maybe promoting self-worth, mutual acceptance. That could be a practical way to chip away at the roots of hatred.
It certainly seems plausible, based on this line of thought. Cultivating that inner security seems key.
Okay, so wrapping things up a bit. Neymotin brings it back to the real world. Love and hatred, they're both here, undeniably present.
In our private lives, our social circles, and definitely in politics, you see both forces constantly at play.
And thinking about what we've discussed, love being intuitive, accepting, hatred needing justification, often rooted in jealousy. It makes you look at those spheres differently, doesn't it?
It really does. You start wondering, okay, what stories are being told to justify the hatred we see? And where is genuine love managing to break through, despite all the tension?
So just to kind of recap the main threads, we've got love, presented as intuitive, expressed through care, acceptance, wanting the best for someone. Beautifully put in Dorfman's poem, really.
Yeah, simple and powerful.
And then contrasted with hatred. Neymotin's argument. Often hiding a core of jealousy, that feeling of being less than, all wrapped up in justifications, a real asymmetry.
Definitely not just opposites. Different beasts entirely.
Which makes that initial contrast, love your neighbor versus you need hate to love, feel even starker. Our deep dive seems to strongly challenge that second idea.
It does. It suggests love doesn't need hatred as a prerequisite at all.
Yeah.
They seem to operate on different principles.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. Considering these different natures we've talked about, and Neymotin's idea that hatred often masks inferiority, here's something to chew on. Could focusing on building up collective self-worth, helping people and groups feel fundamentally valuable, actually be a more effective way to build understanding and connection in society, maybe even more than just telling people to tolerate each other?
That's a really provocative question. Shifting the focus from just managing hate to actively building the foundations, self-worth, mutual acceptance that might prevent it from taking root in the first place.
Exactly. Definitely something worth reflecting on. How these deep, fundamental emotions shape us and shape our world.